If you're someone who likes to have a lot of control and flexibility over your photo edit, I think you're going to enjoy this video. And if you're like me and sometimes get to the end of the photo edit, look at it and go, I've really taken that too far. This allows you a way to actually reduce the overall effect. You don't need to reduce each tool individually. You can just do an overall reduction of the effect. Right, let's have a look at what we're editing today. So in front of me here, I've got an edit that I've just finished working on. And if I hide this layer, you can see the flat original raw file. And on my way to completing the edit, I've got several layers that make this effect up. So let's go back to the catalog. I'm going to create a virtual copy of that photo. And I'm just going to come to the adjustments by right clicking. And I'm going to revert this to the original state. And there we go. This is our flat raw photo. All right, so the first thing we want to do with any edit is work with Develop Raw. And nowadays we have the ability to click that auto adjust feature in Luminar Neo. So that is a great shortcut if you want to take advantage of that. However, I'm going to build this effect myself. And what I'm looking for during this initial Develop Raw is a good exposure throughout the whole photo with a complete dynamic range. And what I mean by a complete dynamic range is that we have a black point and a white point. So I often press the J key on my keyboard to show me any highlights I'm losing information or black pixels where I've gone too dark. And in this case, even though I've turned that on, we don't see any highlight peaking or any clipping on the black point. But if I move these blacks and white sliders, you can see that now we're starting to hit pure white and pure black. And if I turn the clipping warnings off, you can see that there's a real problem with this because even though I've gone down to pure white and pure black, I don't really have a very good distribution of tones through this. There's no real information for me to work with in this file. And so this is really key when you first start working on your raw photo, is you want to just make sure that you're giving Luminar Neo access to all of the tonal information and maximum color information that you're able to do so from the raw file. And one option is to come in and start working with the highlights and shadows, shifting the whites and blacks and making sure that you do have a good tonal distribution. But there's another way that we could tackle this, and I'm going to show you that method in this video. So I'm just going to double click to reset each of those options, and I'm just going to jump into the curve itself. And so what this allows us to do is grab this very far point and move that over until we start clipping to pure white. Now I've turned my clipping warnings off, so I'll turn those back on. And the red is indicating where we've lost detail. So literally all I want to do is just see a couple of red pixels appearing in my photo, and I know that I now have a pure white point. And now I can do the same with a black point and just shift that over. You can see that we can send everything really dark. We just want to see a couple of black pixels starting to appear, which are denoted by the blue pixels. So just by shifting that where it is at the moment, that is absolutely fine. In terms of color saturation, I feel like we should just be able to pop this up just a little bit because there's not too much color in this photo. So we'll give Luminar Neo a helping hand from a color perspective. So again, I'm going to press J on my keyboard to get rid of those clipping warnings. And if we press the backslash key, we can see where we came from, an underexposed photo. And now we have a fully exposed photo with all that lovely, rich tonal information for us to continue our edit. But I think we can do even better with this particular photo, because if we look at the top half of the photo where the mountains and the sky is versus the bottom half of the photo, it's a real dichotomy of tonal ranges. We've got this very dark band through the middle here, and there's a lot of detail in the grass. And then in the background, it's very light and not too much contrast. So what we're going to do is use the technique I showed you in the last video, where we're going to double down with the Develop Raw tool. So what I've done is duplicate the layer so we have an identical copy on top of itself at the moment. But what that's going to allow me to do is separate how I edit the top half of the photo from the bottom half. So let's suppose that we're happy with the bottom half at the moment. That looks pretty good in terms of detail in the foliage and the grass. Let's work on the sky and the mountains. So I'll come over to the edit section in Develop Raw. So we're working on the same raw setup. All we'd need to do is just darken down some of this sky. And we can do that by putting a point on the curve and just bringing that down. That's just going to reduce the midtones. Now you can see that as I do this, this wouldn't be something we'd want to do through the whole photo because we're losing all of that information in the foreground. But look at how if I bring that down, we get all of this lovely, rich information through the line of the mountains in the background there. There's just so much more drama about that. Now, how I've done it at the moment, it is a little bit excessive, so we can just ease that off by putting a point down here, which represents our shadows, and just lift that up so that we're not pushing it too far towards black. Because what we want to be able to do is make sure that we can blend between our original layer, and if I hide this top one, we'll see that, and the one that we've just created, which is dedicated to processing the top half of the photo. So now we've got the two halves of the photo processed the way we want. All we would need to do is blend them together. And we could use a mask AI, but I'm going to show you why this is not a good approach. So for example, if we wanted to select the mountains and the sky together, and then we went to the trouble of just correcting that because for some reason we've got this little edge through here. Crank your strength up to 100, Anthony. Let's suppose that's one solid mask, but look at that nasty haloing we have along the ridge line of the trees there. That's absolutely awful. That is not what we're after. And you could come in if you wanted to and sort of try and blend that in a little more believably. But overall, that's not a good way to deal with masks, and a much better way, I think, if we just reset this, is to just simply work with a linear gradient, which gives us a really nice smooth transition from a full amount at the top all the way to 0. And if I come out of this, now we get that really nice bleed between the two. So if I hide that and then show it, you can see that we've benefited from the two separate applications of Develop Raw, and we've done it in a much more believable way. One thing I would also like to take care of is there's a little bit of excessive digital noise that's more visible in the sky. Of course, the noise level is the same throughout the whole photo, but you just don't really notice it through the more detailed areas of the shot. You're going to see digital noise a lot more clearly when it shows up in flat areas such as the sky. So I'm just going to grab the denoise tool, put the luminosity denoise amount pretty high. Obviously, if you zoom in, it's much clearer to see. So before and after, I'm pretty happy with that. I don't need to worry about doing an AI noise reduction because this is doing a good enough job and it's much quicker. And now I will use that AI mask because I just want to apply that denoising effect to the sky only. And again, I'm just going to clean up the bottom of that mask. I'm really not sure why Luminar is deciding that there should be a solid stripe of line through there, but there we go. That's going to take care of that. And now we have a nice, clean, noise-free sky. So we're going to move on from this particular edit, but what I would like to do, because as you know, if I start doing any kind of editing with a layer selected, it only affects that particular layer. So for example, if I grab Accent AI and boost that up, it's only affecting the top half of the photo. See, before and after, it's just working on the layer we have selected. So I'm going to reset that and undo it because that's not what I want to do. That was just for demonstration purposes only. We're going to select both of these layers and we're going to merge them down. So now we have a flat layer without any adjustments applied to it. And now if you see, applying the Accent AI also affects the trees and the foreground, basically the photo as a whole. That isn't what I want to do here. So again, we're going to throw that away. So the next step of what I like to do is work on the lighting in the scene, control the brightness levels. So one way to do that is on a local basis. So Structure AI is actually changing the localized brightness levels. So it's boosting up and dropping down the brightness levels locally. So I'm going to apply some of that. So that's a pretty good start for our photo. But I also like to make my more global lighting adjustments. So what I want to do is emphasize the brightness around the mountain here and the sky just above it, and also the water here. So we're getting a kind of nice little balance between the bottom left and top right being the brighter parts of the photo. There's several ways that we can work with the brightness in our photo, exposure being one, but my preference is to actually work with the curves tool itself because it gives us a lot more refined control. So for example, I can make everything darker, but if I want to control those shadows again, I can do that. Also with the highlights as well. If I want to sort of tweak the highlights a little bit, I can do that. So once I'm happy with the overall look of that darkening effect, I'm then free to come in with my masks and apply it where I want. So what I want to do is darken down the top left, emphasizing the relative brightness of the areas that are left behind. I'm going to come back to the tool because I'm not done yet. I also want to darken down a little bit of the foreground very close to us. So I'm just going to come back to the masking. Again, choose a linear gradient, click on the bottom because that's going to give me my maximum effect of that darkening. And I'm just going to taper that up towards where this water is sitting just here. Again, let's pop out of that so we can see the before and after. And you can see how we're just starting to sculpt the light. I may also bring in a taper just from this right-hand side as well. And then once I've got it pulled in across there, I don't want it quite as intense. So I'm just going to drop it off the side of the frame. So now we're getting sort of 50% of the effect right at the far right edge there. And then that's just going to transition in towards that brighter bit of the mountains there. As well as darkening the image down, we can also brighten areas up. And another option we have is just to add more contrast into the areas that we deem more important. And that's what I'm going to do now. I want to bring emphasis towards this mountain, also the water here, and perhaps across some of this foliage as well. So just to emphasize how powerful curves are for us, all we need to do to create more contrast is create an S shape in this curve, and that is going to give us a nice punchy amount of contrast. So before and after, that is purely for demo purposes. I don't want to be that aggressive, but what I also want to do is control the highlights. You can see that if I push that up, we can bleach things out, but I just want to protect them and make sure we're retaining all of that information through that highlight point. And by the same token, I don't want to darken down too much that foliage through here, but something like this is pretty good. Maybe just bring those midtones up just a smidge. All right, let's go with that. And now all I need to do is just paint that in where I want it. So before and after globally. Right, now I know what it looks like through the whole photo. I can just grab my brush, bring the strength down so I can build it up. I want to make sure we have a nice soft brush because that is the key to just building these effects in more believably. The same as using a gradient, it's all very smooth and subtle. You don't want anything to be added abruptly. So for example, if I did not have that softness on and then I started painting this effect through here, it's very easy to see where I've actually applied an effect before and after. You can see that outline. That's not what we want. So if you do something you don't like in Luminar Neo, you just press Ctrl Z on your keyboard and that's going to undo it. Let's bring that softness back up and let's just apply that contrast effect a little bit more through the areas we want it. How's that? Before and after, before and after. All right, I'm going to add another new layer where I'm going to work on my special effects. That's going to be things like light rays, atmospheric fog, things like that. So what I'm going to do is duplicate the layer that we're working on at the moment. That's going to keep everything almost like a history state. I know that I can go back to this particular version of the photo with these exact tools applied at any point, and I can just build on top of that. And that gives us a couple of huge benefits later, which will become evident as we press on with this edit. So let's jump into the tools section and do a little bit of creative manipulation of this photo. Let's see if we can't add some beams of light and a bit of layered fog. Now, I'm not saying that this photo necessarily needs any of this. I'm just doing it purely for the demonstration of what you can do with this layered effect. So I'm just going to crank up that layered fog effect so that it's as if, well, we've got that fog laying through the foreground there. And let's play with the depth, see if we want to bring that forward or have it receding further away. A little bit of recession there, pushing it a little bit further back. Something like that's quite nice. I'm going to leave the amount at 100, but instead to control the effect, I'm just going to paint it in. You know, it just makes me feel a little bit more like an artist if I work like that. So let's just do a little brush stroke across the very base of the horizon line there. And we can sort of intensify it by making our brush smaller and then just sort of paint that effect in a little bit more, you know. And this is a really nice way to work because we can just add the effect in, and then if we feel like we've gone too far with it in any place, we can come in with the erase version of the brush and just start to subtract it as well. It gives us a lot of control working this way, before and after. And then once we've got that mask set up exactly as we want it, we can always come back to the layered fog amount slider and then just play with that amount and still have control of how much we want to apply. Let's go full bore with that. And now we're going to see if we can add some sun rays as if there is just a little break in the cloud and some rays of light might be coming through to what is an illuminated area of water here. So I don't know if this is going to look any good or not, but we'll give it a go. So first thing we need to do is push the amount up, and then we're able to place the sun center. So obviously we want to put our sun in the position where we feel like it would be coming from. And we can also use these rays of light as a guiding factor for our viewers. So for example, if we put it over here, the general flow of these lines goes from top left to top right, bottom right, sorry. However, if we put it over here where we want people to kind of go from where the brighter part is around the mountain and the sky down to the water, these sun rays are going to create natural lines for our viewer's eye to follow. So once we've got it in position, now we need to faff around with all these sliders and get it looking the way we want it to. And now I've got the sliders set more where I want them, I can come back to this amount slider and play with that. Now you can see that when I push this to 100, you get this weird kind of solarization effect where it's over brightened, over saturated through several areas. And that's definitely not what we want. So what I like to do is just grab the amount slider and just start to ease that back until we get a hint of it and it's not excessively affecting the luminance or that hue. So what I'm going to do now is just grab my brush, push the strength up a little bit, and I'm just going to paint this in. Sorry, I'm doing the opposite of what I want. I'm in the erase mode, not the paint mode. So what you can do if you make that mistake is just invert your mask, and that's just going to flip it around. And now that's going to allow me to come back and start painting with those light rays. And so again, I'm just going to sort of paint that in around the area where I thought it was going to be a little bit more interesting for our photo, something like that. And if it's a little bit too much in the sky itself, that's where we have this control now that we're using masking just to come in and sort of take that away a little bit from the sky so that we're just left with the beams themselves. But to be honest, I'm not really in love with this effect. I don't think this particular photo benefits from this at all, but bear with me because what I wanted to show you is how this works in with the layers system we've got set up here. So what I'm going to do is just go back to the original version of the photo and show you what we've done so far. So this was our first development of the photo itself. In fact, what I'm going to do is duplicate this layer. I'm going to hide it. And now what I'm going to do is come back to this original layer here, which has already got that develop raw processing on it. And we're going to reset that so that we can see exactly where we started from. And we're going to build this up. So this was our initial development. Then we adjusted the brightness and contrast in the sky. Then we controlled the lighting through the whole scene and started to sculpt the overall look of our photo. And then finally, we've added this adjustment layer here for some more special effects. They're really not very special at all, are they? So this is what I'm sort of alluding to with this layer control approach. What this allows us to do is come into the opacity amount and then drop that opacity. So it's not a case of having this effect or not. What we can do is say, you know, we don't really like it in full effect, but I like some of it. You know, a hint of this might be okay. So how about we put in 28% of this effect? We can absolutely do that. And you're going to see even more benefits from setting up your edit in this way as we go on. But from here, what I'm going to do is merge these layers down and throw away the layers that we've worked on that I don't want anymore. Now, as Neo crunches down all of this information, let me explain why you would want to do that. So as you build up your photo edit, the tools that go into that edit start to accumulate and they start to take their toll on your computer's memory and processing power, and things can start to get a little slow and laggy. So as I showed you before, if we go to the edit section of this layer now, this newly created merged layer, there are no tools there making up this look. And in terms of your memory usage, that is a big benefit to your system. It can breathe again. Whereas if I drop down to the layer below, which has those sun rays, the atmosphere, all of that stuff going on, for us to actually see this layer, Luminar has to tap into your computer's processing to actually render what we see in front of us based on how these photo editing tools are applied. And so what I like to do is just throw this layer away, remove layer. And using this idea, we could actually clean this up even further. So if we come right back down to the bottom, let's say we wanted to keep our absolute base level raw photo with no adjustments, but what we wanted to do next was have a version which combined the initial processing. That's where we would come in, select those layers, merge them down, and try not to get too bored while Luminar Neo is actually doing that. I don't know why it takes so long for it to calculate a merged version, but there you go. And now we can come in and delete or remove those layers that actually made up that effect. So now if I hide this, we have our raw layer. And then on top, we have our initial developed raw. It's looking really good. We can then take our edit in any direction we want. And my preference is to start sculpting the light as I described. Then I'm going to go on to add some special effects. And then from there, I'm going to make more adjustments. So again, we're going to merge this layer. And on this one, we're going to do more of an overall look to the photo. And then on top of that, we're going to do a color grade, both on separate layers. And that's going to be really helpful for us for that overall flexibility. So now I'm just going to jump into some of my favorite tools and just see whether I can't utilize them in the edit. I feel like using dramatic often is really helpful for landscape photos. Before and after just gives us that extra little bit of pop. I'd quite like to add a bit of glow around this area here. So I'll jump into the glow tool. And let's grab the amount slider, and you can see that straight away that adds a really nice soft glow up into the sky before and after. We're also getting a little bit of glow here on the water as well. The way this tool works is it looks for any bright pixels, bright areas in your photos, and then we'll create a diffuse look around only those pixels. And that works in a different way to one of my favorite tools, which is Mystical, which does a similar softening look. But if I push that all the way up, you can see that not only is it softening the highlight areas, but it also softens the shadow areas as well. So if you're looking for an overall softening to your landscape photos, or any photo for that matter, Mystical is the way to go. If you want it just in the highlights, that's when you're going to use the glow tool. And because I wanted to show you how this approach can save you from obnoxious editing, of which I'm pretty guilty at times, let me go even further. I'm going to do a blurred effect. So look at this, I'm just destroying the pixels basically. You might think, well, what use is adding a blur to your photo? Well, let me show you how this can be used to our benefit. So let me push this to, let's say 35% at the moment. Now I'm going to come in with a masked brush, and I'm going to paint this effect in with such a low amount, somewhere around, 20%. We're going to keep the softness now down to 0. And the reason I'm doing that is because I'm going to paint it everywhere. So once I click once, I'm going to then come down and make a kind of S shape, snake my way down over the photo like this. And when I release, what we're going to get is 19% of the effect I just created. So watch this, 1, 2, 3, release, and there you go. We have a softening effect before and after. It's really subtle. Let me go one more time with this just so you can see it a little more clearly. Paint over the whole photo. And now we come to the eye tool, say we see before and after. It's similar to the Mystical effect, but it's working in just a slightly different way. So if you want to soften up your photos, give them more of a dreamy kind of look, that is an approach that you can use with the blur tool. Now, hopefully I've gone way too far with this. Let's hide the layer so that we can see our edit underneath. And now let's show the layer, and you can see that, yep, I've gone too far with this, typical Anthony style. So now we have that ability with the layer properties to grab that opacity slider and just start to bring that down. And now just by staring at the screen as we move this left and right, we can get a sense of, where is the sweet spot for this? And I think somewhere around 50% looks pretty good. Let's go hide and then show. Okay, not bad. Now there is a trade-off with this approach that you need to be aware of, and you've probably spotted it already. But if you're merging down your layers, you don't have access to revisit the individual tools, I'm okay with that. Once I'm happy with the way it looks, I'm happy just having a layer where I can reduce the opacity. But the other thing is, if you're throwing whole layers away after you've merged them down, then you're losing that ability to vary the opacity amount of the differing layers. And that for me is the key to this, is you want to keep hold of the actual finished layers that add another step to your processing. So that's why I break it down into the stages of initial develop raw, then we're going for a light sculpting, then we're going to add our atmospheric effects, then we're going to go with the overall look in terms of things like softening, soft glow, mystical, things like that. And then on top of that, we can add our color grade. And the thing I love about that is it allows us to vary the recipe of our finished photo based on the main pillars that go into an editing process. Okay, let's throw some finishing touches at this and a bit of color grading. All right, let's merge this down by selecting all of those layers, click merge layers. And I'm just going to throw some tools at this to see if I can't enhance the overall look. Love Accent AI, but usually it's far too much, particularly as you've progressed into your edit. So a little bit of that. I'd like to bring more attention to the mountain. So let's see if we can't add some structure into that. Let's boost that up and see what it's doing for us. Yeah, that certainly adds information to the mountain. Obviously way too much through the whole photo. So that's where masking comes in again. Yes, I could use AI masking to select the mountain, but as I've already said, I don't like the abruptness or haloing that can often appear when you do that. So I'd sooner come in and paint this in with a soft brush, and let that just ease into the photo and its surroundings. So before and after, just a subtle pop, and I'm also bringing a bit of information into the tree line as well. And if I want to, I can make my brush smaller and just come in with a bit more of that effect through that mountain line there. So here we go, before and after, certainly bringing more attention to that. All right, let's jump into something different. I would like to go into landscape. I don't often throw this tool at my photo edits, but I'm thinking that in this particular one, it's going to help bring up some of that vibrancy in the grass at the front here. It's doing some pretty crazy things to the sky, so I need to be mindful of that. Let's just have a little bit of that. And another tool that barely gets a look in my work is the foliage enhancer, because if we look at the before and the after, the green that it introduces is not a particularly likable green. I find it gets oversaturated, but thankfully we have this hue foliage slider that we can actually come in and dial in a slightly different hue to the color that's introduced. So if we go before and after, by doing that, it just gives a little bit of elevation to the edge of some of those trees. And I'm just going to bring the amount down. Don't want to go too heavy-handed. Before and after. Okay. And let's take a quick look at super contrast. See if we can't bring in a little bit more contrast into the sky. Grab the midtones. See how that's affecting the photo. Yep, a little boost in that seems to be working for us. And let's do the shadows as well. I don't want to be brightening the shadows up. I want to actually be darkening them down. So we can grab the shadow balance, drop that down just a little bit. And the amount is way too much. So let's do, I don't know, just a little bit. Let's see, before and after. Subtle, but I think that helps us out. And another way to deal with contrast is in the color harmony section. And what we can do is go into the color contrast slider. I really like this. So look, watch this, 100% of that. Again, far too much before and after. But the thing I really like is based on the hue setting, we can actually change the way that that contrast actually interacts with our photo. I think that's a really neat way to work with contrast. Very different, very Skylum, thinking about things in a completely different way. That amount is far too much, but let's see. I don't know. I like what it's doing for the grass. And yeah, I think maybe just tickling a little bit of that before and after. Okay, let's move on to our final layer, which is going to be our color grading. So as a final step, what I'm going to do is duplicate this layer, because I want to show you that you don't have to merge the layers down if you don't want to. We can still get the benefit of what I was talking about before of controlling the opacity, even if we just duplicate the layer. The issue is we have now brought all of those extra tools with us before we start working on this layer. And so particularly if you have a less powerful machine, it is going to be pretty taxing on your computer to work in this way. But let me just show you it as an alternative. So for color grading, we could go for a lookup table. The cinematic toning is often a really nice way to go. I love so much about these particular ones. I think I'm going to go for Los Angeles in this case. And again, the mood tool is so much fun to use because we can apply it several times over. We could come into the creative section if we wanted to. Candlelight, color punch hot, genius, grace, involve. Oh, which one to go for? Sepia. See, I quite like this kind of old worldy, washed out kind of look. That's kind of cool as well. And we can play with the amount, push that up. We can play with the contrast if we feel like it's just pushing the contrast too far. And we can play with that saturation amount as well. A lot of options inside this tool. Now, hopefully you can notice in the cloud here, it's gone to a very white, washed out look. Let's suppose that we wanted to push some yellowy tones into that. Let me show you how most people might try to solve that issue and why it doesn't work. So in the color balance section, we can talk directly into the highlights. So that would be this area. And you would think, well, let's push some yellow into those highlights. Yay, we're turning that yellow. But in fact, we're not. The area that was still white is still white. It's not going yellow. It's the areas around the white where we're actually able to introduce any sort of hue. And so that doesn't really work for us. So I'm going to reset that. I'm going to show you a much better way if you want to introduce an actual color into a highlight. And we do it with my favorite tool, and that is curves. And so because we want to introduce yellow, we obviously need to go into the blue channel. That makes sense, doesn't it? Well, what is the opposite of blue in terms of the way computers deal with colors? It's yellow. And you can see that if I bring the blue away, we get yellow in our photo. It's subtracting all the blue out and that leaves yellow behind. So what we can do is bring that top point down, which represents the highlights. And that way we can actually inject some yellow into what was previously white. Often when I do that, I like to balance out the complementary color. So for example, if I'm putting a lot of yellow in, I will put in a lot of blue. Obviously, this is way too much. I'm just showing you the direction in which I'm moving these sliders so you can get an idea of that balance. So it's pretty subtle before and after. It's just a nice way to add some color harmony to your photo. Now, if you're thinking, what has Anthony done to the colors of this photo? I'll hide that layer. We can see the underlying edit that we've worked on. And now I'm going to show you this color graded version. So I've deliberately gone over the top with this layer because again, I wanted to show you how we can just influence the overall look of the underlying layer with a color grade. We don't have to apply this fully at 100%. As I've been showing you, we can come in, grab this opacity slider and just start to ease the look. So I want to add my own take on color interpretation of this scene. I didn't like it exactly as it was straight out of camera. And so I'm going to introduce this kind of golden sepia look, but this is way too much. So where do I want to sit that? We have now full control over how much of that color grade we actually apply to this photo, even though that overall color grade was actually made up of 4 different color tools, 2 mood tools, 1 color harmony, 1 develop where we changed the curves. So those 4 tools are all being controlled by that opacity slider. So I'm now going to show you our before. This is our original raw photo, and our after, before and after. And now this is the key thing with this particular editing method. My recommendation is for you just to sit on this edit for a couple of days. Don't do anything with it. Just leave it as is and then come back to it. So I don't have that luxury while I'm recording a video to decide whether or not I like this or want to make adjustments, because I haven't had that time to sit with this and just let it sit on my eyeballs and make critical assessments about it. But that is absolutely what you want to be able to do, because it's going to give you the ability to assess what your original raw file was like, what your edit is like, and you're going to see areas where you've overdone it. Like, for example, already I can see that this is far too bright in this section up here. It's over processed, overcooked. And so what I can do is actually start going back in my history to find the place where it went wrong. And you can see that it is here. It's in this particular part of the edit. And so now I'm able with my masking to come in and just knock this back a little bit. So let's go with a third strength, and I'm just going to sort of remove that particular layer from that area. And that way, if I hide this layer down now, you can see that when I show it, all that adjustment is still there, but not in that area. So we're not overexposing it. And now we can add our color grade on top. And if you feel like, well, this is brightening this area up again, we also have the ability to change the blend mode of the layer to color only. And that's another way to work with the final color layer if you want to. As I mentioned at the beginning, in preparation for this video, I'd already done an edit on this photo. And as I flick back to that, you can see that this is very different to the version that we ended up with. Now, in terms of a preference, I much prefer the one on the left. So why did I not edit this one on the right in the same way? Well, one of the reasons is when I'm recording YouTube videos, the brain power I can dedicate to the edit itself is much reduced because I'm spending a lot of my mental energy actually thinking about how I can describe the process and the thing that I'm trying to teach. And so please forgive me if my editing during the videos isn't always as good as I would like it to be. But hopefully the main goal for my videos is that you can actually learn the techniques, you can adopt them, and you can make them your own. If you enjoy the way that I teach photo editing and would like to learn everything that's inside my noggin here, then I'll put a link to my complete Luminar Neo mastery course. Don't get scared by the mastery. That's just where you're going to end up. It takes you right through from the absolute basics, the fundamental principles, and guides you all the way through everything that's inside Luminar Neo. Layers, masking, every single tool inside Luminar Neo has its own dedicated chapter. So if you want to get hold of that, I'll put a link to it in the description below, and I'd love to have you along for that 18-hour learning extravaganza. Thanks so much for watching. I really enjoyed recording this one, and I hope you enjoyed watching it too. I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye for now.